Welcome to Ask the Admin, brought to you by iBailey. Today's topic will be discussing data migration. Our presenters are myself, John Jones. I am a solution architect for iBailey. And with me we have Frederick Barron, one of our technical architects. This is meant to be an interactive session. You can ask questions on the side panel. Please ask any questions as we go through. We welcome all questions, whether they're related to today's topic or not. And also, being interactive throughout the presentation, we will have a couple of polls that we'll put up. And we're going to throw one up right now just to get started as an example of what they're going to look like. So go ahead and mark your answer for this poll. What color is the Salesforce logo? And as we go, we'll have a couple of other polls come up to ask questions as we go through talking about data migration. Okay. Today's itinerary, as I mentioned, this is meant to be an interactive webinar. Please ask your questions. Send them over to us. We'll be watching those as we go through. There'll also be time at the end for questions that come in. A couple of weeks ago, we started working on this. We kind of did a restart. We've started a new org that we're working on. We're building upon that org every week. The things that we discuss, we're putting into that. So as you follow along, you can also watch previous recordings on our website. And bring your questions. We love questions. As we go through this, we are working with the company Universal Boxes, a subsidiary of Universal Containers. It's just kind of formatting what our structure of the company that we're building up. All right, as we get into data migration, this is a topic that comes up often with projects that we work on. Many people are moving data between systems, possibly even from one Salesforce org to another. So some things that you want to know when you start working with a data migration project. The purpose of the migration is helpful. Is this just simply you're moving to a new org? Is this synchronizing data between two systems? Is this you're killing an old database, you're trying to get out of spreadsheets, or what's the purpose of the migration, just to help drive what you're doing? And that can also help drive what data you're moving. And are you moving everything or just a small piece of your old database? If you're moving everything, that's fine, it's a little more work. If you're moving a subset or a small piece of your old database, that's great too. We just have to make sure we define exactly what that is and document very clearly what's being moved over. You also want to make sure you know your timeline to make the move. Data migrations are not necessarily a simple project. They may sound simple, but as you get into the process itself, there's always things that come up that cause delays in your timeline. So make sure you know what your timeline is. It's also good to know the source of the data. As consultants, we do this on a regular basis, and we have worked with a number of different databases. Each database has its own structure on how the data looks, and knowing the source of the data can help you know what to expect as you head into this type of a project. As you start getting into the actual migration itself, there are some steps that you want to follow to try to keep the project moving as smoothly as possible. The first thing is you want to make sure that you are mapping your records and your spreadsheets to your parent IDs. Things like making sure that contacts have a link to their accounts, so that when you import those contacts, they get linked to the account that they belong to. And any other data dependencies that you may run into. Make sure it's all mapped in your spreadsheet. And make sure your data types in the spreadsheet are correct. For instance, with Salesforce, if you're importing into a date field and you have text in your spreadsheet, it will error out. So make sure you know your data types for each field and make sure your data is cleaned up so that your data going into those fields matches the data type that it's expecting. You'll also want to check your fields in Salesforce. Make sure that all the data that's supposed to be represented has a placeholder in Salesforce. It needs somewhere to live. And check your external IDs on all Salesforce objects. As we'll talk in a little more detail here in just a minute. One of the best tips and tricks that we've got for doing a data migration project is to use the old database IDs for everything in your data migration. It helps a ton. Also, you want to make sure you load your data in a proper order. Any type of data dependency that you have to load the parent records first. For instance, you can't load a contact and associate to an account that doesn't exist. So you have to load accounts first and then your contacts. Otherwise, you end up doing multiple iterations of your data loading just trying to get your parent linkups to match correctly. Some tips and tricks that we've learned. This comes with experience, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes for you. Use your old system IDs. Even if you're going from Salesforce to Salesforce, always use your old database IDs in your data migration. It helps with mapping everything together. You can delete those IDs when you're done if you need to, if you don't want them stored in a database, but you can also hide them. They don't have to be on your page layout, so they can exist and be there for your purposes, but you don't necessarily have to have them listed. Also, as I mentioned, make sure that every object involved in your data migration has an external ID field. We'll show you how to create this in just a little bit, but you'll want to create just a text field, mark it as an external ID, and then use it for your data migration. If you're going from Salesforce to Salesforce, Salesforce has two versions of IDs. It has a 15-digit and an 18-digit ID in the system. Depending on how you export your data will depend on which ID you get. As a recommendation, we're going to show you how to set up to do this properly, but you will want to just force yourself into the 15-digit IDs and make sure that your external IDs are marked as case-sensitive fields. That will help avoid a lot of confusion and headache later on as you go. Watch that for other databases too. There may be other systems that have similar situations, and you'll just want to make sure that your IDs are consistent throughout all of your data loading spreadsheets. Another thing to think about is your audit fields. What are audit fields? Audit fields are your system fields. Things like creation dates, modification dates, lead conversion dates, things that way. They can be opened up through a permission set so that you can edit those fields on creation. Once a record exists, you cannot change those fields, but you can set those fields how you want. And that can help you maintain some historical data in your old database. Especially with sales records, sales tends to really like that type of thing. And also, we can use external IDs for users, which will help map things like record ownership. So we can mark a user with an external ID and then map to that with our spreadsheets. So there's some basic information on the data migration. We're going to back up just a little bit. We've got a couple of questions to throw out there and ask. So we're going to throw another poll up on here. And before I do that, yes?
John, before we go into the poll, we've got a question here. How do you ensure data integrity?
That's a real good question, and that can be a difficult one. When you're dealing with these data migrations, you want to make sure that the data goes in as you expected it to. And to be honest, the best way to ensure your data integrity is to simply do some spot checking after the data has been loaded. Go through and look at records, pull some reports, and see what kind of data you've got going in. Reports can be very valuable. If you've got old reports from the old system that kind of give you some sales numbers or record count numbers, that can help. You can rebuild those reports in Salesforce and then look at those numbers to make sure that they're matching up. So a combination of spot checking and using reports to validate data against the old system are probably the best recommendations I've got for handling that. Do we have any other questions coming in?
We don't have any other questions right now. Let's go ahead and launch that poll.
We're going to throw up a poll here. So go ahead and mark what you think here. If we're loading our objects, what objects should be loaded first if we're going to load opportunities? Remember, opportunities are going to be your sales records, which generally link to something else. Looks like we've got a pretty smart group coming in here. So the correct answer on that is accounts. Accounts are generally a requirement for opportunities, so you have to have your accounts loaded first in order to mark your opportunities correctly. So just some things to keep you thinking about those data dependencies and what's happening there with them. All right. At this point, let's jump over into our demo and take you into Salesforce and look at setting up some of these things. I'm going to pass the presenter over to Fred to help us with this part. We're going to go through and we're going to show you how to set up some of these things that we've talked about now. So we've got some different things going on here. So Fred, why don't we start with those audit fields? Let's show them how to set up the permissions to be able to edit audit fields.
All right. So we're going to go into Setup. It looks like my computer wants to sit here and load for a little while. And John, you're going to have to help me out. It's been a while since I've done this. This is in Profiles, is that right?
There's actually two steps to turning on your audit fields. The first thing you have to go is go into the user interface settings. Now this used to be a feature that you had to request Salesforce support to turn on. And with the latest release, they actually put it in the system for, I believe it's down near the bottom. There you go.
Down here under Setup, enable set audit fields upon record creation and update records within active owners.
So first you have to make sure that is turned on. And then I would recommend you create a permission set instead of editing a profile. The reason is you don't want to open this up to just anybody. You want to control who has permission to edit these fields.
So let's go ahead and create a new permission set. Okay, so we've got our permission set.
Yep. And now I believe it's going to be under System Permissions. We're looking for a permission that allows you to edit those audit fields.
is under system permissions and my search did not work. Let's try this again. Set audit fields upon record creation. So we want to turn this on.
There we go.
And again, what this is doing is this is going to give our user permission to set those fields. So when we do the data load, we can set our creation dates. And if you don't do this, then when you load your data, the creation date is going to be whatever date that you loaded it into Salesforce. You don't get that historical information.
Right. So once you've got that permission marked on the permission set, then you'll need to go to Manage Assignments and add your user to that permission set that's actually going to be using it. In this case, we're just going to add ourselves as the admin to that permission set. But doing it this way allows you to delegate the data loading process off. If maybe you've got a secondary admin helping you, then you could just give them the permission to the audit fields and let them do the data loading for you.
Okay, so we have that set.
All right, so there's our permission. So now we can control audit fields.
So the two that we're going to load today, we have accounts and we have contacts. So before we get into loading those, we need to make sure that we have an external ID on the accounts and on the contacts. So I've already set this one up. We've just set up an external account ID. We're not going to allow duplicate values because we don't want accounts to have the same ID.
And we're going to look at case sensitive.
This is going to be case sensitive. And then you also want to make sure you turn this on, the external ID.
Correct. And you'll see in this case, we're just using a text field with a 20-character length.
And I'm just going to go into
use any ID for this field.
And I'm just going to go into contacts, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to check and make sure that we have the same thing set up, external ID. Okay, so we are ready to load some data. So there's a couple of different tools that you can use. There's the data loader. The data loader is software that you download onto your computer and you run it from your computer. What we're going to use
today,
today,
Salesforce tool. It is a free tool that you can use for Windows or Mac. It's pretty decent and works really well for most scenarios.
but what we're going to use today is called dataloader.io. I've already signed in and authenticated it. When you first sign into this, it uses your Salesforce login. You'll have to go, it'll take you to Salesforce. You'll have to authenticate it so that it can talk to your Salesforce org. And this tool is free up to a certain number of records, and then you have to pay for it. So we're importing a very small number of records one time, so this is going to work perfectly for us. So I'm going to do an insert. I'm going to start with my accounts. Remember our order, if I do the contacts first, the accounts aren't going to be there. And I'm going to upload my CSV file. And before we get too far into that, let me show you that CSV file. It's really simple. I've got an account number, company name, and then I have the company information, billing and shipping, phone number, and a created date. So this account number is going to be our external ID. I'll show you where we map that in just a second. And then we also have contacts, which will load after we load the account. So this next screen here, we're back to data loader. This is where you map your fields. So we've got that account number, and because there isn't a field called account number, it doesn't automatically map. So we are going to map this to our external account ID. So that's going to pull that account number into that field. Company name is going to go into the name field, account name.
And you'll notice when he pulled that up there, account names had a little required mark next to it. The data loader IO system will tell you you've got required unmapped IDs and custom options there. So if you're wondering what fields are required, just hit that little required section there and you can see, oh, I need to be mapping these fields in order for this data load to work correctly.
So right now when I go to required, account name is the only one that has not been mapped. And then the rest of these are the same. For simplicity, we left these the same as the Salesforce name, so we don't have to go through and map everything. Most of the time, this isn't going to match up the same. You're going to have to go through and map your fields. The good news is that once you do this once, these are all mapped, and it's a lot faster to load more data if you need to. So I've got the created date in there, account ID. So let's go ahead and run this. So this is going to save and run.
And you'll notice, if you notice on that screen there was an API mode option, a bulk or batch upload. We recommend always use the batch upload, and that just helps to avoid any problems if you have something that's not bulkified in your system. If you've got code or process builders or something that way, batch loading will help avoid any problems that you might run into with those.
All right, so we've got some errors here. Let's see. What is going on? Okay, so it is complaining that our created date is not in the valid format.
Now this is a good one. You'll notice that it actually tells you what the valid format should look like. So it makes it easy for you to go back to your data file and edit that created date so that the format matches what it's expecting.
Month, day, year. So we have 2-digit years. We need 4-digit years. We need to put the T for the time and the time zone.
And that wants the time zone.
So we've got this example here. Let's go back to our accounts. And to speed things up a little bit, I am simply going to paste that in. So these will all be created in 1987. Let's change that. Let's say these were created. Let's move it a little bit forward, back to the future here. Save this. Okay, so I'm going to load this file again.
Now this will be one of the nice things is we won't have to remap everything. Actually cancel that, Fred. You don't have to go in there. Just hit the Run button. Mark Upload New File. Select your file.
Okay.
This will work as long as you don't change the number of columns in your file. You can make updates to the data. Just do this. Everything's already mapped, and you'll see it just runs real easy.
5 successes. So we come back in here, refresh our accounts. You'll see we have all of those accounts that we had in our CSV file. So we're halfway there. We've already imported all of our accounts. Let's go take a look at that created date on, I think Acme was there before. Let's pull up Alligator Sports. Created date, February 20th. All right, so we are good on our account. Now let's go back again and look at the contacts. I want to show you one thing here. We have an account field, and you'll notice these numbers. These are going to map to the account. The account number. So we got 1001, 2, 3, 4, 5. The contacts, we have the same thing, 05, 04, 05. So we're going to map those across. And when I do this, I'm not going to do the created date on the contacts this time. Again, simply for time, I don't think we need to go in here and update these, and we're just going to skip that error. So I'm going to go back into my data loader IO, create a new import. All right, so again, this is going to map to our external ID field, first name, last name, email. I'm going to take the created date off. And again, this is just to skip the error. I'm not going to go in and change all that right now. Okay, now this is where it gets a little bit different. So we're going to map to the account ID. So we want to fill this in and make sure these accounts are mapped correctly to the account ID. So I've selected account ID. Well, account ID is going to be expecting a Salesforce ID, and our external ID is definitely not a Salesforce ID. So we're going to click this little lookup via, and this is going to give us all the fields, and we're going to say we're going to look it up via the external account ID. You have a couple of options, first match and multiple results. We're only going to have one match because we set it to a unique field. We can't have duplicates. We can mark an error if the more than one match is found, or we can just insert null values. We're going to just leave it with the first match. So we're going to go ahead and save and run that. And that is completed successfully. So now you'll see we have all of our contacts in here. They're all tied to their accounts, and we are ready to go. We've got all of our data loaded up.
Wonderful. Now we've got a question here, Fred. What if you've gone through and loaded your data, and then you discover that you missed a data element? So, for instance, marketing pops up and says, hey, you forgot to put in the accept newsletter checkbox to your contacts. How can you go in and simply add that to your data set?
Okay, so what you'd want to do is you're going to come in here and go into, you want to change this from insert to upsert. You want to be able to upsert, because we don't want to reinsert our records. So we don't want to change it. So let's actually go back to contact. Let's see, let's pick a contact field. Contacts open here. And let's do a title. So we're going to add the title to our and we're going to make everybody important CEOs. And again, this is just simply to speed things up a little bit. So now we're going to upsert instead of insert. And the reason why we're doing upsert instead of update is if there's new records that we're pulling in, we want to insert them. If you want to just, of course, update your existing records, you can do that. But if there's been any records added to your file, they're not going to be inserted. All right, so this is loading. So now, again, we see here we've got ID is going to map to I don't want that contact ID, and we are going to look it up through external contact ID. The rest of these are all good. Account is going to be our account ID.
Now, because this data has already been loaded, you could leave these off, but like Fred said, if you have any new records, you want to make sure everything is mapped so that those new records get mapped correctly. Now, keep in mind, this is an upsert function, not an insert function, which means that you cannot map the created date field during this process, or it will error out your record because it can't update that field.
Which I just did, and so I'm going to have to go through here and fix this.
So yours are going to fail because of that.
So I need to take the created date off. And then we'll go ahead and run it.
Now you'll notice as that's running, if you look on the right-hand side there, you'll see it's keeping a history of everything that you've done in Data Loader IO for you, and you can download the error and success logs from any previous tasks right here in the system. That's one of the features that we love about Data Loader IO so much, is it keeps that history for us. Now the Apex Data Loader from Salesforce does the same thing, but it's all files on your hard drive. It's not quite as easy to see what's happened.
So now we've updated our contacts.
Wonderful.
All right. Now it looks like we got one more question here. What about going from Salesforce org to Salesforce org? So let me do a quick data export. It's pretty much the same thing. I go to, did I go to the right place here? Yes, export now.
Yeah, you can do it that way.
Okay, so I'm going to export just accounts.
Now there's multiple ways to export your data from Salesforce. You can use this, you can use reports, or you can use any of the data loader programs also have an export function to do the same thing.
So we could have also done this from data loader, which actually probably would have been a good idea, because let's go ahead and do this from data loader. I'm going to have to wait for Salesforce's data export. So I'm going to go ahead and export all the fields. And run it. So once I load this up, this is the CSV that was exported. And you'll notice we have account ID. So in the other ones we had 1001, 1002. This time we have Salesforce IDs. So we're going to import this the same way. We're just going to set this as our external ID. Not your account ID, but your external ID. So if I was to import this, let's go ahead and go to you do an insert, and that one is account export. Now I'm not going to actually run this because all of these accounts are already in Salesforce, and I don't want to duplicate all of them. I just want to show you here we've got the account ID, and this is not going to go to the ID field. It is going to go to the external, which is already mapped here. So let's go ahead and take this off. So what this is going to do, this is going to set the old Salesforce ID to your external account ID. And then when we import the contacts, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be mapping them by that old Salesforce ID so that they can come into your new org correctly. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. You just go ahead and run it. And we don't have to change anything else because all of these are going to match up to the fields that they should match up to. You notice there's some of them in here that don't. Billing address is not formatted right. So there might be a little bit of changes that we need to do to clean up our data before we import it. But generally, it's a pretty simple, straightforward process. And again, I'm not going to run this because then we would get duplicate accounts in our org. All right, I believe that is all we have for the demo. John, do we have anything else to go over?
I think that's it, and I don't see any more questions for today, so I think we're good.
I want to ask one more question here. We're going to throw up one last poll. So when you're loading the data, what file format should you use?
That's a good point. I think we touched on it briefly.
All right, it looks like we got some smart people in our group here. Everybody is saying CSV, and that is correct. It should be a CSV file. It's really easy to take an Excel file, save it as CSV, and upload it. So one of the things that we like to do is we'll have an Excel file that'll have the different tabs. We'll have a tab for accounts. We'll have a tab for contacts. So we might have accounts and then another tab, and we'll have our contact information in it. Just as we're building the data, then a copy over. And then when we're ready to save it, we'll go to whatever tab we need to save it as a CSV, and it'll just save that tab. It just kind of makes working with it a little bit easier so you don't have all these different windows. You have one window, and you'll have to save them as individual files.
But this makes it easier to do your data mapping and get everything set up correctly.
Okay, so we've got another question here. If records were created in a Salesforce instance without the created date being set, can it be changed, or would that create a new record?
So once the record is created, you cannot change the created date. What you have to do is do a new insert which will give you a duplicate record. So you'll either have to delete the old record first or delete the old record after you insert the new one with the correct created date. So it's very important, if you want creation dates to be historically correct, you have to do an insert first the first time you load that data. And that goes for creation information, creation date, created by, and last modified date, last modified by, as well as any lead conversion information.
So the reason that Salesforce does that is simply for auditing. You really don't want people to be able to go in and change the created date and get accurate reporting of your records.
Yeah. All right, wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. Again, we appreciate the questions and the participation. We hope you'll join us again in the future as we continue to build each week. And also keep in mind, as you register for these webinars, feel free to send us any questions that you have that you would like to have answered in these sessions. Like we've mentioned, questions don't have to be around the specific topic that we're presenting on. We're happy to answer any questions that anybody has to throw out to us.
All right, we've got one final follow-up question. Can we send out the link to the YouTube channel? We will send that out in the follow-up email after the webinar so that you can go view those videos.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Again, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar in the future.